Multiple times throughout my childhood, I've caught a white face watching me through an uncovered window. The face just looked like a floating, blurry white face. No head or body like a floating mask. No features, no eyes, no expression, always at night. The last time I saw it was around 14 or 15 years old. I'm 32 now, but I've been binging paranormal content the last few days, and it's been on my mind after seeing similar posts. Something I've noticed is that it doesn't have a nickname like Hatman. The only shadow person I've seen was Hatman, or the old hag has. Something different I've noticed about other encounters is they all see it inside the house with them, but similarly catch it peeking at them. The first time I saw it, I was around 5 years old. I'm supposed to be going to bed with two of my younger sisters. We're in a room on the second floor that has the window uncovered. We're talking and laughing while all the adults are downstairs. We're all laying on our backs on a blanket on the floor, facing the only window in the room, which was centered on the wall. The face moves into view from the right side of the window from our perspective and begins to just stare down at us. At this point, we're all already running out the door, crying. I was the last one out, and my sisters couldn't run fast enough because I was jumping up and down behind them. My dad did a search around the house and, of course, found nothing. I asked one of my sisters about it, and she didn't remember. I have to ask my dad if he remembers. The last time I saw it, I was watching my little brother playing video games in the living room one night. This time was in a double-wide trailer. The TV was centered between two uncovered windows. I'm sitting behind him, watching him play, but my mind is somewhere else. I don't know what caused me to look at the window, because I don't remember having the feeling of someone watching me, and it wasn't movement. I just immediately look at the window, and there, if it has a gender, is looking right at me. As soon as my eyes made contact with the face, it glided quickly to the side out of view. I just sat there, struck with intense fear. I didn't say a word about it to my brother. This happened on Christmas 2 years ago, and I still can't believe it. For some context, me and my parents have always been familiar with paranormal or strange happenings in our lives, but ever since my sister passed about 7 years ago, it seems to have increased, with the fairly obvious reason as to why. Me and my sister were very close, and every major holiday or celebration, I always get little hints, I don't know what to call them, that she's there. Well, on Christmas 2 years ago, my mom noticed a robin on our fence. Robins are a sign of past loved ones. We strongly believe this was my sister coming to see us for the holidays. As this was happening, I was trying to find my train ticket as I'd booked to go see my long distance girlfriend for the holidays. My parents were standing at the door watching the robin, and after I got my train ticket in my hand, I went to look at the robin. I remember these series of events very distinctly. I went to the window to see the robin with my train ticket in my hand. The robin waited until I had seen it before it flew off. Me and my parents conferred and all mutually agreed it was my sister. After a moment of silence, I realized my train ticket was no longer in my hand. I was totally weirded out as both my parents had seen me grab it and come to the window with it in my hand. We all looked up for it for a solid 30 minutes, all to no avail. At this point, I'd already texted my girlfriend to apologize that I wasn't going to be able to make my train because my ticket had randomly disappeared. Well, 30 minutes later, the most cliche thing possible happens, and a news report comes in saying that a train had crashed because of a random outburst of snow. It was my train. If I hadn't lost my train ticket, I would have definitely been on that train and most likely would not be alive. It's definitely one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me, and I don't think it's a coincidence. About a year after I was born, my parents settled down in a cozy little old cabin in town, which was pretty ancient by their descriptions of it. They said almost immediately strange, unexplained things seemed to happen. I'd be laughing, staring at corners with no one in the room with me. Or they'd walk in on me staring at the doorway, listening to what seemed like nothing. But it was like I was listening to someone speaking to me. The hardest thing, I guess, would be hard to believe was the time they were watching TV, when out of nowhere I started laughing at something outside. So they thought maybe someone was out there. When they checked, there was nothing, just the clothesline out back. Then, with nothing in sight, they heard the clothesline snap, then vibrate visibly, like someone pulling the line and letting go. When it happened again, I'd start laughing. They didn't know what to think, but to just close the door and blame the wind. Another time was around 11 to 12 years ago, at the last house we lived in as a family. My mother told me the story around the time it happened to her. I remember that night. My aunt and cousin were staying with us at the time. My sisters were pretty tiny around then too. They were in bed with my mom that night. My dad was working late, so he wasn't home. Mom said she was having a hard time going to sleep with a lot on her mind. My sisters sprawled all over the bed, didn't help. But when she dozed off, it was interrupted by one of my sisters crying. In order to check what was bugging her, my mom sat up, thinking she was probably having a bad dream. What she saw when she opened her eyes, she said, gave her a chill down her spine. There was a small pitch black shadow, like creature over my sister. It probably noticed my mom waking up and darted off the bed and down the hall, without making a sound. She immediately started praying and rushed out after it. She searched the house, thinking it might have been a small animal, but nothing turned up. She said whatever it was big enough to not be a mouse or rat. Our dog was outside and we didn't have any cats. It still gives her chills to talk about it. She just refers to it as a demon when telling the story. Back in my freshman year of high school, I had a really creepy close encounter in my bedroom. With what? I don't know. So it began on a summer evening with my family. We had just gone out for dinner with some relatives. On our way back home, my parents had decided to treat my younger siblings out for the night and got a hotel room, while I went back home with my grandmother, uncle, and cousin. Once I got home with them, my cousin and I put on a movie. My uncle was pretty drunk at the time, so he went to bed early. My grandmother went to her room. She lived with us at the time, and she also went to bed. My cousin and I stayed up until the movie was over. I was feeling very uncomfortable with the movie. It wasn't really scary or bad. I just felt uneasy at that moment. We saw and heard some unusual things at the house sometimes. Scary movie didn't help the mood. Once the movie ended, I told my cousin that I was going to bed. He too said he was going to bed, and so we made a place to sleep in the living room. I walked down the hallway to use the restroom. On the way, I noticed my uncle was passed out in the guest room. My grandma was sound asleep too. I went back to my room and got in bed. While laying there for a bit, I heard my cousin shuffle his blankets around and my uncle snoring in the next room over. Slowly, I drowned out the sounds as I was falling asleep. Suddenly, I could hear some faint footsteps going down the hallway. I thought, oh, Grandma's probably up heading to the restroom. As I laid there listening, I could hear the steps getting closer and closer. The steps kept coming down the hall. Maybe she's heading to the kitchen, I thought. Then out of nowhere, I hear a loud footsteps in my closet, which is nowhere near my door. Then another step, slower than before, as the steps got closer and slower. I felt cold, and my heart started racing. I was in disbelief at what I was hearing. I just stayed as still as I could under my blanket. And as whatever I was hearing creeping to me got closer, my clothes basket full of clothes and a heavy bag holding it down fell. That's when I shouted real loud for my cousin. He came running into my room and turned the lights on. I looked around and saw my room, messy clothes all over the floor. My closet door shut and my cousin looking pale. I got up and went into the living room. There we sat, talking about what I heard. He too said he heard the footsteps and was feeling something was wrong. That was the last time I slept in that room. I never went back there alone. That summer, we moved due to other issues, but every time I drive past that house, I feel uneasy, like there's something waiting for me. Well, that was the scariest ghost encounter I've ever had so far. I don't know what to believe, but what I know is something was in the room with me that night. I was born on Long Island, New York, and since I can remember, I've experienced strange occurrences. I was never able to sleep at night, and from a young age, I was always terrified of the dark. Yes, every child is afraid of the dark, but I was afraid for a reason that I was unable to explain until later in life. There were a few stories while here, but I want to fast forward to when I was a bit older, and things began to make sense to me. My family purchased a second home, and we moved to Colorado. We lived on a ranch, located at the top of a hill that fed into the Rocky Mountains. There wasn't much around us. A few neighbours, our barn with our animals, and thousands of acres of hilly and mountainous terrain that surrounded our family. There was a long dirt road that led to our property, Rattlesnake Road. It was a perfect shot of the scenery leading up to our small 3-bedroom home. It was quiet, peaceful, but the land was old. I was about 7 years old at the time. This is when I began to understand what I was going through wasn't normal. Our home was small. It was a ranch style house with a 3-car garage which took up half of the structure. The other half was built into the hillside where you entered from the front. You walked into the living room and could see straight out of the back sliding door into the plains. In front of you was the kitchen, old with brick. Straight down the hallway started my room on the right, my brother's room followed that, and lastly my parents' room on the left. The bathrooms connected, and were on the right as well, wrapping around to the back of the house. I left the hallway lights on when I slept. I was scared to begin with, but something always felt as though it wasn't just our family there. One night, I was up and couldn't fall back asleep. My parents and brother were sleeping as well, and I could hear them snoring down the hall. My bedroom door was open, and I was facing the hallway when suddenly, the pull string to my closet clicked, and the lights popped on. I could see the light making its way through the slatted shades of my closet accordion doors. My heart began to race. They shut off. The air in the room became cold, tense almost, as if the oxygen was being siphoned out. The silence set in. I couldn't hear the snoring anymore. Nothing. I looked towards the hallway, and there passed a short, black, static mist. It had no facial features, but I could see what would have been a mouth. It seemed as though it was smiling ear to ear, which paralyzed me with an intense feeling of dread. It passed my doorway out of sight, not making a sound. Moments later, I heard what sounded like the door to our garage open and close, and the air lifted as my surroundings returned to normal. I knew I was awake. I knew what I had seen was there, and it visited me, only to get worse as time went on. I woke up the next morning as if I was walking in a dream. Everything I saw had some sort of a glowing aura to it, but it wasn't something that was comforting. In fact, this was the first time I can recall feeling anxiety. That cold feeling that starts to drip down your body and creates a pit sensation just under your sternum. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee, and I remember her reaction to me as I turned the corner around the attached kitchen island. Our interaction was surface level. She looked at me as though something was off with my demeanour, but didn't seem to think much of it. I remember sitting down at our table and feeling depressed, sad. It was for no reason at all. Nothing was wrong. I wasn't in pain. I was just sad. I believe that this was the point where I allowed myself to be vulnerable to whatever was around, whether good or bad. I allowed it to begin, to nudge its way in. I spent the next few days around our property, helping out with the barn and spending time with my family. My grandparents shared the property with us and had built a house on the plot just down from our home. My uncle lived with them at the time, which became very important to me through my younger years. I grew close with them. He taught me a lot of things that I hold with me to this day. The way I would describe him is someone who found himself during the hippie movement in the late 60s and really grasped that forever. He's kind, very articulate, smart, but blunt when the truth needs to be told. He studied ancient Native American history for most of his life, which made him very excited when we decided to move to the area that we did. Our property was Ute and Araparo land through time. We would hike around and find teepee rings, arrowheads, buried animals, and other artifacts that seemed harmless back then. My uncle would tell me the history of our area. He claimed that where we lived and the surrounding land was sacred, and likely a burial ground in parts for whoever lived in the area many years before us. This was never confirmed, but I bet that it was true to some extent. I didn't understand the significance of these claims until I was in my teens, when activity ramped up to its highest point. I was fascinated by the stories. I felt as though I was living through this history as well, and I believed that I could feel the past just by standing outside and looking through the hills. It was a few months before anything happened again. My nerves began to settle a bit at night, but I still slept with the hallway light on for comfort. I left my door cracked open at this point because I didn't want to see the figure again. Because the house was built into the hillside, the only natural light came from the skylight. At night, a single beam of moonlight would shine down through the window, illuminating my room in an icy blue. You could see the dust particles floating through the beam, eventually settling to the ground. I was awake again, counting the dust as it floated, staring into the moonlit room. Then, it vanished. The light was gone. Something was blocking the skylight. My heart raced, but I remember telling myself that it could be an animal that made its way on the roof and it's blocking the light. The stillness set in again. Suddenly, I heard the noise of our plastic trash can being pulled out of its place, which sat on a red brick slab. It was next to an old wood-burning oven that came with the home and was set back into a red brick enclosure. It made a very distinct sound, unmistakable. I got up, thinking my mom was awake, and poked my head out of my doorway to look. The lights were off, it was quiet, but our trash can was sitting in the middle of the living room. I took a breath and slowly walked over to it, moving it back to its normal spot. I turned to go back to bed, but it slid out quickly again and was pushed behind me, sitting about 2 feet away from where it is normally. I panicked, but couldn't believe what was going on. At that moment, the entrance to the garage opened and a brush of wind came through. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I ran straight for my bedroom. I pulled the covers over my head and laid in silence. We had an antique piano player by the end of the living room, one that played itself, but you had to pump air into it with pedals. It began to play, one note, over and over and over again, until finally it stopped. I peeked out of my covers to see the moonlight again and felt a sense of relief. Whatever it was gone. I began to drift to sleep again, and as I was, a faint shh was whispered into my ear. My eyes were closed, but what I could see came out of the darkness. A smile from ear to ear with a single finger placed over its mouth as it faded back into the abyss. I was raised in a big city in Mexico, in a house built around 1915. I was 14 at the time, and because of the large attendance at our school, I was enrolled in the evening classes, which started at 2:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. During this time, my mother and I were the only ones living in the house. I arrived home this particular night from school and went directly to the room where we had the TV. The house area resembles an inverted L. When you enter the house, to your immediate left is the living room, kitchen, and 2 rooms. If you go straight, there's a long hallway followed by rooms and bathrooms. My mom was watching TV, and I told her I was hungry. She said okay and left to the kitchen, which practically sits on the opposite side of the house. I immediately turned my PlayStation on. I was playing louder than I should have, but then I heard my mom call my name. Now, I grew up in the house and heard my mom call me probably 1,000 times. Her voice always echoes through the hallway. On this occasion, that didn't happen. The best way I can describe it was that I half heard it and half imagined it. I paused the game and went to the door threshold and yelled back to see if she was calling me. I didn't hear anything, and I ruled it as I probably imagined it. I lowered the TV volume considerably and continued to play. Within a minute, I experienced it just as well. I clearly heard my mother call my name without the echo from the hallway, and as I had half imagined and half actually heard it. I went to the door again and yelled back again, still not sure if I just imagined it. I didn't hear an answer. I remember saying, "She will really call me again if she needs me," and decided to mute the TV. I hadn't even fully sat back down when I heard her call me again, but it wasn't her voice at all. It was a higher pitched voice. At the same time, I heard a loud bang coming from the living room, and I did hear the echo of that bang travel through the hallway. My initial thought was that my mother had fallen, so I sprinted towards the kitchen. By the time I got to the house entrance, everything was pitch dark. I called my mom, but there was no signs at all and no lights. I felt extreme chills, and I didn't have the willpower to even enter the living room and turn the lights on. The only lights were the street lights outside, so my instinct was to get out. I went outside, and while I was trying to catch my breath, I saw my mother barely walking back into our dead-end street. Apparently, when she left the room, she had gone to the store to buy some dinner. She obviously asked me what I was doing outside, and I told her everything that had just happened. I was expecting for her to be surprised the way I was. She was all calm and said that an exactly same experience had happened to my aunts when they first bought the house in 1979. Apparently, she also heard my mum calling her 3 times, and on the third time, a loud bang. I was never told this story, and it just made it worse in my opinion. This was my second big experience, and definitely made me a true believer. My parents got married and bought my home in 1995. My dad, my mom, and half brother moved in. In 1996, they had me. Around 5 years old, they divorced. But before they did, my dad has always been a skeptic of the paranormal. I don't remember any of this now, but in the middle of the night, my dad was not once but twice woken up to a man with slicked back hair. The man would be in my dad's face. When Dad woke up and saw him, the man would walk out through this wall to my room. Dad got up after the second time and found me with a fever. After that, I used to sing songs from the 40s and 50s that I would have no way of knowing. When asked, I told my parents, the man at night taught me. Turns out, this man was my great-grandfather. He was also in a band, we learned. My dad would later describe out loud what he saw. My grandma said that sounded a lot like her dad and brought a picture over. It was him. Sometimes there were noises in the kitchen and my dad would look out. My great-grandfather would appear in the kitchen and my dad and then walk out the door to disappear. I got a little older, around 4 to 5, and was used to the high presence of active ghosts around me. In fact, I think I became scared and used to have someone sleep with me to fall asleep. I had a recurring dream. I would later tell my dad that our house would catch on fire. In the dream, I used to be floating across the street looking at my house from an angle. I told my dad and he would tell me it was just a dream. In 2002, my house caught on fire. That night, my parents divorced and my brother went to live with our grandma. we would never be a family under the same roof again. I sometimes think about this and my weird connection to my great grandfather. I look similar to him in the facial structure of my eyebrows, cheeks, etc. It's always eerie to me when I see our pictures together. He died tragically at 36 years old in a car accident on New Year's Eve night after going out to get some coffee and smokes. His station wagon got hit so hard his head flew off. This year, I think he would have turned 100 years old. I told my dad that he died the same year my dad was born, 4 months short of each other. It was a sunny day in Hawaii. I was in my bedroom watching TV when suddenly the loudest knocking on my bedroom door happened. Bam, 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 bam. It was like there was a SWAT team ready to break down my door. So I jumped up, pissed, thinking it was my older sister, ready to kick her ass if needed. I went to the door to see no one was there. I quickly looked at each room. Each door was open, showing me no one was there. I went outside and ran around the house looking for her in pure rage. I saw no one. I returned to my bedroom and I heard muffled voices, like someone was talking in the other room. So I checked every room again and ran outside just to return and only hear those muffled voices in my room. I checked again in the other rooms. There was no noise. It was only happening in my room. Talk about driving me insane. It made no sense to only hear these muffled voices in my room and nowhere else. My high school sweetheart came over that day and I told him what happened. He confessed to me that his mom, who just passed away a week ago, that I never met, hid her engagement ring in my room. I told him, I don't want that ring in my house. He said okay, and asked to be in my room alone so he could talk to his mom. I said okay, but he still had to store her ring somewhere else, not in my house. I feared his recently passed mom might not have liked me, from number one, not knowing who I was before she died, and here I am with her personal belonging, and two, she might have been racist and didn't approve of my relationship with her son. So I was scared at this point, thinking these things and not knowing what happened was supernatural. I guess whatever my high school sweetheart said to his mom and done worked, because the mumbled voices stopped. Crazy stuff happened to me too, after playing with a Ouija board. I'm glad I no longer live in my childhood house that I did that in. My mom bought the Ouija board from Toys R Us as a fun game to play with my friends. My friends wanted to contact Bloody Mary, both on the Ouija board and in the mirror. But everyone was too chicken shit to stay to see if anything would appear in the mirror, and they ran out. That day, we went to the beach in the crystal blue water, where you could clearly see the sand below. I came out of the water, and there were several red claw marks like fingernails going down my entire body from my neck down my arms and legs. The weird thing is, I didn't feel the burn of these scratch marks until I exited the ocean and noticed them. I lined up my nails to these scratch marks, and they looked like they could have come from a human. My uncle that was with us said, I must have scratched myself on a rock or something. I said there were no rocks. Then he said maybe a fish. Kids at school started spreading this story, and I was asked if the Bloody Mary story was true. I didn't want to answer them, partly because maybe my uncle was right, but I didn't fully know. But after several times of the kids begging me to answer, I just nodded my head yes, and didn't say anything more. I threw my Ouija board away in the outdoor trash for it to reappear in my room. Later my mom said she saw it in the outdoor trash, so she returned it. Gee, thanks mom, I'm scared of it. My friends and I played it again. The board liked doing figure 8 patterns between questions. One time, we asked the spirits how old it was, and it said 0. My young teen friend thought it was from her miscarriage, so she even played it by herself. I know, freaky, right? But part of me thought it was fake. Days later, doors in my house started opening and slamming completely shut repeatedly. My mom said it must be the wind, but no windows were open for that to happen. I even checked to see if there was something wrong with the doors, like it was loose or something, but it wasn't. It made no sense. Once it wasn't completely shut, you would have to turn the doorknob for it to reopen. So how did it reopen by itself after it slammed shut? The TV turned on and off by itself every time my mum and I got into heated arguments. When we yelled at each other, the TV turned off on its own. My mum always thought it was my fault and yelled at me, and I yelled back at her for pointing to the remote and said it was nowhere near me, it was closer to her. Then, when we were finally quiet, the TV would turn back on. We didn't exchange words when this phenomenon happened and parted ways. The final straw at home to make me feel like there was definitely something supernatural going on was, I'm in my bedroom, late at night, not a worry in the world. My lights are on, I'm watching a family-friendly show called Green Acres. I felt something like a heavy sumo wrestler jump on my bed. My body bounced from this. I thought, don't panic, there might be a logical reason. I looked to the last foot of my bed and it was sunken in. Then I saw sunken marks crawling up to my thigh. I jumped up and screamed, running to my mom's room. She told me I wasn't allowed to sleep with her. She said she doesn't care where I slept, but it can't be in her room. She then confessed that the thing crawls into her bed. She tells it to go away, and she can feel it crawl out of her bed, respecting her wishes. She said, all I have to do is tell it to go away, and it has to respect my wishes. That night, I slept in the living room, but after that, I returned to sleeping in my room. Many nights without incidents, but I kept saying out loud, go away, repeatedly, because I was super scared. Many years later, I moved back home for a short stay with my firstborn. I was a young toddler. While my daughter was in a crib, outside of her crib her toys went off in the middle of the night, lighting up and making noise. My mom played it off and said, oh, the batteries must be dying, for it to go off on its own. I think I like believing whatever my mom told me, to reduce my fears. My ghost stories didn't start until that damn Ouija board. I've warned my kids never to play with the Ouija board and told them my stories. I told them it invites ghosts into your home, but you might not be able to get rid of them. Between 2017 and 2019, I worked as a municipal park ranger in a city outside Phoenix, Arizona. One of the parks I patrolled was a 20-something acre historical farm. The park is beautiful with buildings dating back to the late 19th century. The oldest building on the property was built, I believe, in the 1870s. Me being a believer in the paranormal, I had asked a few of the other rangers if anything strange ever happened there. They all said no and would dismiss the notion of it being haunted. I had been working for about 3 months when the city started experiencing a rash of break-ins at the ranch. The ongoing vandalism prompted the park department to assign us park rangers there overnight as a deterrent and try and catch whoever was trespassing. The first few shifts went by with nothing happening. Then one night, I got the answer to the questions I'd been asking about the ranch being haunted. I had parked my patrol truck back in a small grove of trees next to a gate. The fence along the trees was one of the areas that I felt the vandals were using to get into the park. It was about 1 o'clock, and I was filling out my shift log. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a glow in the windshield. Initially, I thought I'd gotten a text and looked at my phone, but it was still black. Thinking then that it was a police officer checking the perimeter with their flashlight, as they often did, I looked in my rear-view mirror. Again, that wasn't the cause of the glow. I then looked out the windshield and got the shock of my life. Walking from my right to left, I saw what I can only describe as the bottom half of a woman in a long dress. I could see the dress billowing out with each step. I immediately thought of the way the women in the movie Titanic looked walking. The apparition gave off a slightly bluish way. Kind of looked like a projection in Star Wars. Needless to say, I got scared shitless. For whatever reason, my first instinct was to turn every light my truck had on, including my overhead light bar. My second instinct was to drive clear across to the parking lot on the other side of the park. I wound up sitting there the rest of the night, trying to debunk what I had seen. I wasn't able to come up with a valid reason for what I saw. That was one of the last nights I worked at the ranch overnight. Luckily for me, the city had installed a series of CCTV cameras all around the property that were monitored by an outside security company. Ever since I was young, I've always had paranormal experiences, specifically with past family members and past pets, but I've always had a closer connection to one past family member. When I was very young, I can't even pinpoint when my grandmother, my dad's mom, died. I'd only met her twice in my life, once in her hoarder house and once while she was on her deathbed. I don't remember a lot about my childhood. A lot of it's repressed. But when I do remember things, it's so vivid, I feel like I'm back in the memory. When I think about visiting my dying grandmother, I can remember her hospital room, how bright white it was, the flowers next to her bed, the window and the white sheer curtains, even the smell. I constantly find myself visiting it in my dreams. For the longest time, I didn't realize it was where she died. I'd forgotten. All I knew was that I recognized it in my dreams. I remember her hospital room more than I remember her funeral, to be honest. I never got to have a relationship with my grandmother. Granted, she was old. I'm surprised she was even alive to see my older brother be born. She was in her late 90s by the time she died. She had my dad when she was in her 20s, I believe. I didn't, and still don't, know a lot about her. Hell, I didn't even know what she really looked like for years. All I know is that we share a middle name, which I have claimed as my last name. We share a similar attitude, as well as certain physical traits, but that's all I know. When I was in elementary school, I'd have woken up because I felt like someone was in my bedroom. Assuming it was my mama, I sat up in my bed and looked at my door. I didn't see my mama. I just saw a thin silhouette of a woman, and I knew it was my grandmother. So I got out of bed, walked over to this figure, and hugged her. I can vividly remember feeling these thin, frail arms around me, and her hands were strong, soft but strong. She walked me back to my bed, and once I was safe in my bed, she walked out of my room, and I fell asleep, knowing I got to see my grandmother. I never told my mama or dad about this. I thought they would think I was lying, so I kept it to myself. That was maybe 8, 9, maybe even 10 years ago now, and I still feel her presence. Not every day, of course, but I often feel her around me. I've woken up to her rubbing my back, knowing it's her because her hands were so small, soft, and strong, unlike my mama's or dad's. I've also woken up to her at my door or the foot of bed, just watching. Not in a creepy way, just to check on me. I found she often visits me when I'm close to death or in insane pain. I'm often sick, as I'm disabled and chronically ill, so I often get very dangerous illnesses. Even a common cold can cause me immense pain. After every suicide attempt, she would visit me, and hug and comfort me, running her long fingers through my hair. Or when I had a very dangerous kidney infection, which resulted in me losing nearly 25 pounds. Once I had come home from the hospital, I woke up to her standing over me and checking on me. Recently, my dad showed me a picture of my grandmother. Keep in mind, this is the only picture of my grandmother that I have ever seen. I don't even remember what she looked like when she was dying. I looked at this picture, she was late 20s and maybe early 30s. And it's exactly how I see my grandmother when she comes to see me. She's young, her hair is always up in a twist. She's tall like me, and has this beautiful slim yet big nose. and her eyes are kind, so kind. Having never seen a picture of my grandmother, I was in awe. I feel she's trying to have the best relationship she can with me. I mean, I am her first son's first and only daughter, and I appreciate it. I want this relationship. How do I strengthen this relationship? My dad will not talk about her unless he's feeling emotionally sound. They were very tight, and her death ruined him, so I don't feel comfortable asking him about her. The house was very old. It was 2 stories and had a creepy basement. The first floor was the kitchen, living room, dining room, half bath slash laundry room, and my parents' bedroom. I should also mention we had a small, very white dog. No cats at all. The second story of the house had 5 bedrooms and a full bath upstairs. My bedroom at the time was the closest to the top of the stairs. My parents' bedroom was off to the right of the stairs. My mother was a very devout Catholic. We went to church every Sunday and confession every Wednesday. I hated it. However, when my mom would tuck my brothers and I in bed at night, she would bless our rooms at night with the sign of the cross, saying, "In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, I bless this room." This was a very important thing for her to do for my brothers and I. We believed in her blessing. We believed it protected us from evil. It kept the bad things out of her rooms. We believed in it so much that we were afraid if we went through the doorway of our rooms in the middle of the night, we would break her blessing and then we would be doomed. So we stayed in our rooms till the first rays of sunlight. I wasn't the perfect little girl. I was a troublemaker. Being that I was the youngest and boys could not hit girls, I would start fights with my second oldest brother and then cry saying he started it. Because bratty little sisters do that. Well, one night, as I was sleeping, something woke me up. It was dark in my room. The bedroom door was wide open. Couldn't shut the door. That would also break the blessing. My bed sat against the wall lengthwise next to the window, and my doorway was straight across the room from my bed. When the light was on, I had a very clear view of the banister of the stairs out in the hallway. But on this night, it was pitch black. I shouldn't have been able to see anything. I didn't have a nightlight then. But like I said, something woke me up on that night. I thought something said my name. When I sat up in bed, I wasn't afraid. I was more confused about why I was awake more than anything else. No one was there, so I thought. Then I saw it outside my bedroom door in the hallway. It was a black shadow, barely taller than me. I could see it because it was darker than dark, if that makes any sense. And I heard my name here. "Pixie, come here," it said. I'm not using my real name. "Come out here." So I got out of bed and I walked close to my door, making sure I didn't cross over the threshold of the doorway. And I got on my hands and knees and got as close as I could, again making sure not to cross the door. It was a very black cat-looking thing. It was smiling, telling me to come out of my room. Its teeth were sharp and pointed, and only slightly lighter than it. Its eyes were glowing black. I know that doesn't make sense, but it had eyes and they were looking at me, like it wanted to eat me. It had a tail, and that tail came to a point like an arrowhead. I just looked at it. It wanted me to leave my room. I reached up to the light switch on my wall and turned the light on. It was gone. Nothing there. I looked around as much as I could without crossing over the door, and I couldn't see if it was hiding in the rest of the shadows of the hallway, so I did the only other thing I could think to make it not come back at all. I put my hand out into the hallway and felt up the wall of the hallway and turned on the hallway light. I left both the hallway light and bedroom lights on. I had to leave the lights on. I broke the blessing and went back to bed. When I woke up, I told my mom about it. She dragged me to church, had the priest say a prayer over me, and made me drink a gallon of holy water. Well, maybe not a gallon, I'm sure, but it seemed like it was quite a bit. She said I had seen a demon who was trying to steal my soul. Years later, I was watching a friend of mine playing Alice in Wonderland, and I shit you not, that is the closest image I've ever seen to the thing that was outside my bedroom door. I was never afraid of that thing, but I was shocked to see it in a video game. The eyes and teeth are the right shape, but not the right colour. I never saw it again after that night. At least not in that shape. I was about 15 or 16 at the time, because I remember I had started experimenting with cannabis. I remember walking the tracks with two of the guys from our group of friends. Let's just give them letters to identify them. There was W, D, C, B, and myself. Today it was just C and W, and we were headed back to Lakeview Park, a well-known spot in the city where teenagers and grown-ups alike hang out. Across the street from one of the park entrances is a path between the elementary school and a neighbourhood which leads to the railroad tracks, and this was the quickest path to where we were heading. The day was like any other of a summer in Virginia. It was hot as hell, and all we wanted to do was get back near home base to smoke and chill. We left the park and headed across the street and down the path. As we're walking and joking around, I start to feel like someone was watching us, but that wasn't out of the ordinary, as I feel that way a lot during my walks. But today, it was as if something was trying to get my attention. I proceeded on, ignoring my bad nerves, blaming my desire to smoke. We get to the area where we exit the woods up a steep hill, and as I get to the exit ahead of the guys, I see two girls walking. One about 10 or 11, and the other no more than 4 or 5. They were brown-skinned girls, maybe Native American or maybe from India, coming from the opposite side of the track, where there's an open area hidden by lots of trees that had a similar exit to where we were exiting. The area is an area like a wide trench, and I found some old things tossed about in there through my travels. Now, I wasn't used to seeing kids this young in the middle of the woods, where the railroad tracks were, but since there were so many paths and apartments and such surrounding it, I thought maybe it's some locals. As soon as I finished that thought, I noticed their clothes which didn't look anything I had seen before. It was foreign to me that two little girls would be dressed in skirts and tights while walking through the forest. I mean, it's hard to explain, but it reminded me of clothes you see from period pieces from the 1800s. They were getting close when I made another discovery. As they walked, I noticed they were quiet. Too quiet. Like the rocks weren't moving beneath their feet. They didn't speak, they just looked at us and walked past. As they walked past, I got this eerie feeling that those kids weren't just kids. It's hard to explain, but I got this feeling of panic as if I needed to be as far away from that area as possible. We made our way onto the tracks. I looked back at the path, and it was as if they disappeared. The path has no offshoot paths, just forest on either side, until you see the back of the playground area and baseball field of the elementary school. Who were they, and where did they go that quick? There's no way they were hiding, because there was nothing to hide behind from the angle we were standing, which overlooked the whole path. Who knows if they were just kids that we saw that day? There is a quarry that has been filled right behind that area. They seem to be coming from where 2 kids were killed, and one of the bodies was never found. With its dark history of racism and prejudiceness, they could have been ghosts of some children that were killed and dumped back there. I think that maybe before those kids that went missing, and the case that ultimately prompted them to fill the quarry, it may have been a place to kill and dump bodies of children and or minorities. I think when they found one kid's body and couldn't find the other, that they may have found more bodies and decided that it was best kept a secret and filled it in, prompting some of the activities in the area. It is well known that some of the areas located around the tracks were graveyards of natives and Confederate soldiers. It's well known that many tragedies have occurred in this small town. It's well known that the police force has and always will be corrupt. The citizens' casual racism and pride is sickening, and if you want proof, check on Colonial Heights Issues page on Facebook. So when I was about 11, my mom decided to move me and my brothers from Richmond, Virginia, to a little town called Colonial Heights, or better known as Colonial Whites, because of its history of being a sundown town, whose residents used to consist of nothing but white people for decades, until about the 60s or 70s. Even then, there were probably only one or two black people, as well as being very open about its local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. I wish I was kidding, but no. Anyway, I moved to this place and met some guys and basically became like a group of friends who did everything together. We would frequently meet up on the railroad tracks because it's how we got around, and was a good hangout place because you didn't have to walk directly on the tracks, as there were side paths which in turn also had little offshoot paths to different parts of neighbourhoods or streets. Now from time to time, I would experience some weird and strange things on these tracks, or very close by. It was as if maybe something was out there with us, watching, waiting. People in the town and the adjoining small village often use these tracks for travel or hang out, so it's not out of the ordinary to see or hear certain things, but sometimes I have no explanation for what I experience. One particular day, I was walking along these tracks to get to a path that led beside some friends' houses. I was about 11 or 12, and I remember walking along the track. I was far enough from the main road and any of the paths that led directly to a neighbourhood, so if I had to run from a dog, I would probably be fucked. It was about 11 a.m, as I wanted to get there early enough to hang for a couple of hours. As I'm walking on the tracks, I began to hear loaves crunching from the forest area, and the woods aren't dense, so you can see a lot of open areas. I peer into the forest and I see nothing, and I shrug it off as a bird, but as soon as I start walking again, the leaves start crunching again. So I overthink and look down to see if I'm stepping on leaves that are in the tracks, and to my surprise, it's no leaves, just rocks, metal and wood, and believe me, that's a whole different sound when you're walking. I stop and start again, and so do the leaves crunching from the forest area on my left, which is also side the path that's a ways up ahead that leads to my friend's house is located on. So I say fuck it, and fucking take off. As I'm running, thinking in my head that it's probably nothing, and I'm tripping until, out of the corner of my eye, I can see leaves in the forest area moving. And my brain automatically said, hey man, even though you clearly didn't see a damn thing, just imagine it's a dog. Newsflash, it wasn't a dog. I don't know what in the fuck it was. Now that I think about it, it reminds me of that scene in Evil Dead, where the camera is rushing through the forest. As I get closer to the path, I have to take I'm scared for my life, because as I said earlier, there wasn't nothing there, but there was something moving and it was moving fast. Finally, I get to the path, and then turn into it, and as I ran, I could hear whatever it was behind me, as if it was taunting me. Like it had the power to take me at any moment, but it didn't. It was toying with me. I get about where the house is located, to the right on the path I'm taking. As I get closer, I hear it move back into the forest and move a bit away. I broke off the path and ran up the steps to the front door. My friend opens the door and looks at me and asks if I ran and if I was okay. I said yeah, and was skeptical that he wouldn't believe me. I said if I was chased by a dog or something, and he responded there was a family of foxes that the mother was very protective of, and I just said yeah, maybe, but deep down I knew it wasn't foxes. I've seen those foxes he was talking about before, and what I saw or didn't see was not that. Whatever it was, didn't want me that day. I was new to the area, and I was in its territory, and it wanted me to be aware, I believe. It sounds crazy, until you learn about the town's history. I was about 17 or 18 when this happened. My best friend lived in a neighbourhood near mine, but his neighbourhood was closer to the railroad tracks that ran through our town. It's a town called Colonial Heights in Virginia. Now he and I and a couple of other friends used to hang out on these tracks since we were about 11, as did a lot of other people in the town and the adjoining one as well. Most of the time we used it as a chill spot or a way to get to different parts of town quicker. There were also these little paths on the side of the tracks, which is where we would hang when the open part of the tracks were too hot. I always joked about how it felt like someone was watching whenever I was alone, but shrugged it off as an overactive imagination. This time was different. It was night time, and my best friend and I were walking along the path one night, and made it right behind another friend's house. As we're walking toward the path that takes us to his neighbourhood, we hear sounds like twigs snapping, so we stood there listening and trying to see. We both pulled out pocket knives because why the fuck not? His knife being the larger of the two, I feel rather confident until the sound starts to get closer, and it's moving faster towards us, which in turn freaks me the fuck out as well as my friend. You could feel the heaviness of the movement coming towards us, as if someone or something was running full speed. Now I know you're thinking, maybe it was an animal, but let me stop you right there. What I saw and didn't see that day could not be an animal. As the footsteps came closer, faster, the leaves in front of us on the ground were flying out of whatever path, as if it was clearing a direct path to us. It happened so fast, we had no time to react without knives and kind of just stood there frozen until the force stopped right at our feet. I remember standing there looking at my friend, expecting him to laugh, but he felt what I felt. Whatever it was stopped right at us and seemingly disappeared more than it already had. This wasn't the first time or the last time my group of friends or I would experience some truly unexplainable shit here in Colonial Heights. I'll be telling more of these experiences in the days to come. I had never noticed any darkness around her when she was a child, but when she turned about 22 and she was in a relationship with her baby daddy, she seemed to become very secretive and sneaky. One day, they both came over. It was about 8 o'clock at night. They were doing laundry at our house. About 10 minutes after they'd been there, I started hearing this metal banging outside on the roof by the kitchen. It was very deliberate and loud. I've lived in this house for 30 years and haven't heard it before or since. Instinctively, I knew they had brought some evil with them. All I said to them was, whatever you guys are mixed up with, you better stop doing it. I was really scared, but I went outside. Saw nothing. It started again off and on till they left. They broke up and she moved into an apartment by herself. She slept over a few times at our house because she was scared. Shortly after one of the times she slept over, I fell asleep on the living room couch which she had slept. I was awoken by an all-black ghost woman who spoke to me. It sounded like she was talking to me underwater, asking me where Nell was. I ran through the ghost to my bedroom and didn't come back out. Nell called me a few weeks later and told me this ghost lady in her apartment wouldn't leave her alone. I'd never told her about the ghost I'd seen, so I invited her to join me on an outing to the mall. In the vehicle, the car doors would lock and unlock by themselves. Nell said she came with us. When we got to the mall, we walked by a custodial closet and the door opened by itself. When I was young, I used to wake up around 3 every morning for some reason. I was always rested and energized, so it was impossible for me to sleep again. I'd get up, get dressed and cleaned for school in the next few hours as usual. I walked into the living room to use the laptop, and about an hour passed when I realized I forgot to have my shoes ready, so I headed to the bedroom I shared with my siblings. As I reached the doorway, I heard someone running behind me, and it was an exact mimic of my little brother's footsteps. I was confused and went to turn around as I would have seen anyone leaving the room or my mother's. But before I turn around, something insanely tall starts breathing heavily down my neck. The heat of it was intense and I froze in place out of fear. Whatever it was, it gave off a feeling of pure terror and dread, but it didn't do anything but stand behind me, just breathing and watching me. It felt like a million small needles pricking into my skin, standing so still and breathing very little, hoping I would be safe. As mysteriously as it arrived, it disappeared like it was snatched away without a trace. I already was holding the shoes and thinking it was a trick to get me to move. I throw them behind me just to see nothing. It left a memory I'll never forget and took my sense of being scared of most things with it. I think about it sometimes and I really feel like I could have died. There is another thing I consider an encounter in my sleep, but I don't know if anyone is interested in hearing, so we'll see. I believe it might be connected, though I'd rather not have this post be a run-on. So about 10 years ago, I noticed that every time I'm about to sleep, there's a knock on the closet in the bedroom. It always feels like it's coming from inside of it. My first thought has been that the apartment is old and settling, or the pipes behind the closet and temperature changes are the issue. However, the knocks come at random times and mostly exactly the time I'm about to fall asleep. The apartment I was in at the time when I started noticing this was 30 years old, and I was on the 18th floor. I moved about 6 years ago to a newly built condo, 15th floor, and started living with my girlfriend. Yet, the knocks follow. I personally have issues with insomnia and sleep paralysis, and a lot of times, the knock has been the trigger. Yet nothing malicious has come from the knocks, except sacrificing my sleep, I guess. About 4 years ago, I moved to our current house, 3rd floor, 15-year-old condo, and the knock has followed me as well. There are massive subway building tunnels close by, and construction noises, yet this specific noise is there. I always have a fan running for airflow and white noise to help me tune out a lot of noises. Last night, my fan wasn't on because it started making clunk noises and left it off, so I was more aware of knocks or other noises. Exactly when I'm about to fall asleep, each time, there is the knock. It seems my sleep is the enemy of whatever this is. The whole night this experience happened until I passed out, yet only slept for 1 to 2 hours the whole night and was awake most nights. My girlfriend hears it too, so it can't be only in my mind. She attributes it to other things such as AC and buildings being old, but she hears it. This was never malicious, just annoying. Very annoying, due to making sleeping a luxury. I'm 28 male with short hair. Every night I lie in bed to try and sleep. I always eventually feel this sensation like someone is gently playing with my hair. I'm always wide awake, and it doesn't hurt but really creeps me out. Sometimes it feels like a slight tug on my hair strands, and other times it's like someone is gently swirling their fingers and counting my hairs. Usually it starts at the back of my head/crown and then moves towards the sides. 90% of the time, it gives me goosebumps and makes it so much harder to sleep. I've felt this for months now, including every day this week. It took 2 to 3 hours to eventually fall asleep, every single night because of it. I visit my family twice a month and never feel the sensation when I sleep there. I just got back from 3 weeks of business travel and didn't feel it a single night in the hotel room. I even consciously thought about it while lying in bed before sleeping, and noticed how I didn't feel this sensation at all on any nights while away. If this can be static electricity, is there a way to ground myself while in bed? I tried changing sheets, touching metal window frames in bed, and still feel the sensation. I felt this for months now, and it's driving me crazy and really messing with my sleep.